everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. I'm doing this broadcast in the dark because, we changed the clock, so now it's like 3:30 here in New Jersey. It's already pitch black. No, I'm joking. What time is it? It's 6:30. but it feels like it's like midnight, Anyway, so today's the 14th of November. A lot of things happened in history this day. King Charles III, so the current monarch of the UK, he was born on this day. Who else was born? King Hussein of Jordan was born on this day. Let's see what else happened. Oh, yeah. Ruby Bridges, who was born in 1954, was 6 on this day. And she was the first African-American child to go to a school that had been ordered to be integrated pursuant to the Brown versus Board of Education decision that came down from the court in, 1954, so 6 years earlier, right? So the year she was born. And so Brown said separate is not equal, right? It overturned this longstanding precedent called Plessy, which was the Plessy versus Ferguson case that was decided in like 1898. But anyway, Ruby Bridges was born in Mississippi, and she attended William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans. And here's a picture of Ruby Bridges going to school on her very first day. Now, you may notice that Ruby Bridges' classmates there were a bunch of really, really tall white kids that wore suits and ties to school. No, actually, they weren't. It turns out that those were U.S. Marshals that escorted 6-year-old Ruby Bridges to school every single day. Excuse me. And every single day, she had to walk through a gauntlet of people shouting racist taunts. They would come with signs every single day. And she was taught in a classroom by herself because all the white parents at the school had withdrawn their children from school. And so she was basically taught by a woman that was from Boston. And Ruby Bridges is still alive today. She's a civil rights activist, icon and stuff. But I, when I think back, and this is 2 years before I was born, but when I think back, when I think about a little 6-year-old girl, right? Like she didn't decide or argue Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka. She didn't, put any of this into place. She just took a placement test and was selected to go to this school. And, she was just trying, she was a first grader. And even back then, even when, in the deep South, because again, this is New Orleans, even then, I can't believe that people had that much racist energy to like come out on a daily basis to harass a 6-year-old kid. It's just mind-boggling. Like I would even say it's beyond racism. It's like inhumanity. It's like, yeah, I don't even get it. And so she was, every single day she went to school with the U.S. Marshals and, was taught by herself. And, it's an important chapter in U.S. history, but like the actual day-to-day stuff, what happened this day was super important, right? It was integration of public schools in the United States. But what happened to her personally is like, it's kind of mind-boggling. And also, she was studied by a child psychologist, right? To see, like they learned a lot about stress, that's put on children and stuff like that. A lot of the things we understand today about child psychology, kind of were studied, in situations like Ruby Bridges was put in. So she is a very brave young woman. And like I said, she's still around today. She's a civil rights activist. So also on this day, November 14th, this is important to me personally because this is the day my grandmother was born, my maternal grandmother. And she was born in 1902. And every once in a while when I want to consider like generations and time passing and stuff, and I look at my grandmother, right? My grandmother was 97 when she passed away. But the interesting thing is that, like I think about what my grandmother was around for. Like the Wright brothers had not yet flown at Kitty Hawk when my grandmother was born. When my grandmother was born, we were still, the U.S. involvement in World War I was still 15 years away, about 15 years away. My grandmother, so she lived through World War I. She lived through the 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic. Of course, she lived through the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War, Korean War, Kennedy's assassination. And I was a little kid when Kennedy was assassinated. I was like 14 months old. But just incredible. Like she was born before the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk. And then in her lifetime, and really, well before she died, we put a man on the moon. And I'm not going to debate that, by the way. So it was kind of, it was an unremarkable life in a way, but it was also incredible, like all the things that she was around for. And there's lots of people like that. So if you have a relative that's like old, but still has a decent memory and likes to talk, go talk to them about anything, because their life, they've lived history, right? So it's just really cool to like understand that. And sometimes you find out, like I was telling a story about how I thought my Uncle Joe was older than my dad because he was in the Navy before my dad was in the Marine Corps. Like, I wouldn't have known that unless I was talking to my dad about that. And, so if you have old relatives, call them up, go see them. A lot of times, just start talking to them about anything. Ask them what they remember about, the day that Kennedy was shot, which, by the way, the 60th anniversary is coming up on the 22nd of November. Ask them what it was like when they were a kid. If you got somebody that's, 75 years old, go ask them what it was like when they were a kid, when it was Christmas time. Like, I think that would just be really cool. And maybe even videotape it so that even after they're gone, you can share that with, their progeny, their successors. It's nice to know what your ancestors had to say. So, like a little family history project or whatever you want to call it. So anyway, that's November 14th. So I'm here in Net Cong. I'm curious how it got that name, but it's kind of interesting. I didn't check on that, but I'm here in Net Cong, New Jersey. And this is, I'm on a load, I'm in between stops, and it's just one of those loads where let me back up and say that I know a lot of people are concerned about how much time they sit. I certainly am. As I always remind people, there's a frictional cost to this. And so I took this load, and it's a 2-stop load here in New Jersey. It picked up at Smithfield in Northeast Maryland. Now the pay on this isn't bad, but there's a huge gap between deliveries. I delivered this morning. I think my appointment time was 6:30. I got there right around 6. But then, and it was 14 pallets. My next delivery, though, isn't till tomorrow morning at 7. But the delivery's only 25 miles away. And I was like, couldn't they have scheduled them back to back? Because truthfully, the place that I delivered at 6:30, they open as early as 5. And I can't believe that if I had gone to the other place at, say, I don't know, 8:30 in the morning, that they would have been like, no, we can't take the other however many pallets it is. It's probably about 14 also. So I'm sitting here at this truck stop, and I use that term loosely. Really what it is it's a Citgo station with a truck wash that Pilot just basically attached their name to. So even with Pilot's really low standards, this place stands out. They charge me $20 for parking, and I know it's New Jersey. I know I'm not that far from New York City, but the fact that they wanted $20 for parking was just irksome to me, because not so much that they wanted $20 for parking, but that I had to pay $20 for parking because this load timetable is so jacked up. And so I'm basically sitting around for 24 hours paying $20 for parking. I hate to pay for parking, as I'm sure, because I know other people obviously love it. No, I'm just joking, but it just kind of irksome to me that I have to even still be here. Like, I feel like I could have, and I had a lot of time left on my clock too. Like, I could have delivered, let's say we had set up at 5 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. I could have delivered, I could have been, 500 miles from here, and already picked up a load for delivery in the morning. So it's super inefficient, and the time frames between these loads are obnoxious. And I know everybody's suffering with that. It's not just me. I'll still have an okay week, but even when I have an okay week, I just would prefer not to be sitting around. That's just me. So anyway, enough about that rant. So I wanted to talk about really like two things that have been on my mind. So the first thing I want to talk about relates to what I experienced in ACE 2 class. And I talked the other day about some lessons I learned. And I learned some stuff about myself and my driving and how I actually needed to speed up a little bit so I could knock my RPMs down. And I've done that, and it doesn't seem like my fuel economy is suffering for it. So I can go a little bit faster. I don't even want to go a little bit faster, but I'm going to, just to be more efficient and cut down on the number of turns the engine's making. But one of the things that really jumped out at me, other than the fact that 4 out of 14 people showed up late for the class that I was in, one of the things that jumped out at me was how many people in my ACE 2 class really were not very good at buying fuel, and it was costing them a lot of money. So everybody knows, so I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and I'm going to share a couple of lessons that I've learned over, 4.5 years of trucking. So one of the first thing is, where do you get information? And we all know that you can put in a macro 27 and that'll give you like what we used to call at night a fuel solution. I don't know if people still use that term, but we call it a fuel solution. And when I was at night, and this is probably not great for a starting trucker, but when I was at night, they didn't really, they would give you a fuel solution, but your fuel card was always open at Love's truck stops. That was just company policy. You could go to any Love's, or you could go to like a TA, Petro, Pilot that they designated on your fuel solution. And they also gave you route solutions too. They would, because it was their truck, right? Their truck, their fuel. So I still got used to just kind of using Love's a lot. And that's when I kind of got Love's loyal, if you will. But then when I went to J&R Schugel gave you fuel solutions, and they did not want you to deviate from it. I did sometimes because I didn't understand what was going on. And that's, that's one of the problems I have with the trucking industry is that like people that work in the puzzle palaces, the buildings, not the trucks, they want to just hand down guidance, edicts, instructions. But they don't ever want to explain to the drivers why they're doing stuff sometimes. And I remember one time I was in Williams, Arizona when I was at Schugel, and I was looking on truck stop apps, so like the Pilot app and the Love's app, at fuel prices, posted pump fuel prices. And I realized that they had a fuel solution for me to fill up in like Barstow, but the fuel in Barstow was significantly more than the fuel in Williams. And I think they wanted me to go to not a Love's, but either the TA or the Pilot there in Barstow. And so I was like, oh, well, hey, the fuel is cheaper here in Williams. I want to fuel up here. And so they got all mad at me for doing that. And what I didn't know, though, was that they probably did have a fuel discount where they wanted me to fuel up. But because I didn't realize how they operated, I cost them money. Now, they let me fuel up there because I said, oh, I'm fueling up here. And I did that a couple of times when I was there. But if they'd have just taken time to explain it, I probably would have said, oh, I understand why they want me to fuel up at this piece of crap Flying J instead of this nice shiny Love's, even though I thought that the Love's had cheaper fuel. So fast forward to Prime. Prime gives you a couple of options if you're a lease operator. And I'm sharing this because I want people to be successful here, and I don't want them to spend more money than they need to do the same job, to make the same revenue. So what I realized is a lot of these folks, not a lot, but probably about half a dozen of the people that were in my class didn't know, they didn't use the macro 27, but they also didn't know how to even comparison shop using the app. And so there was one guy that I talked to after the class, and I said, hey, you don't have to use the macro 27. I said, I don't use it, but here's what I do. And so I want to explain what I do, and I'm sure lots of drivers do it, but this isn't necessarily obvious to everyone. And a lot of TNT trainers probably just say, because I've certainly said it, hey, we're going to fuel at this place. But they don't explain why they wanted to fuel at a certain place. I think that I've tried to train my trainees to know why I wanted to fuel at a certain place, because I would talk about what the price was and stuff. So I said, what I do is I map out my route. And this comes into the trip planning. I still map it out, say, I know that I'm going to go this way. And then I look, I know how much fuel I have, and then I look to see what the cheapest place I can go the farthest away. So I'll go out like 700-800 miles. Am I going to get that far today? No. But let's say that I can get 400 miles and I'm going to need fuel. But I know there's a place that's substantially cheaper than a place that's going to be in that 400 mile range. What I'll do is I'll go to that 400 mile spot and I'll stop and I'll get maybe 50 gallons. So I find that the best price fuel at the 400 mile spot, knowing that in another 400 miles, I'm going to fill up. So, I just stop and get 50 miles. Now, this is also what the Macro 27 will do for you. And this was how the fuel solutions were at Schugle. They'd be like, stop and get 50 gallons here. I hated that because to me, that was inefficient. And when you're a company driver, you're not paying for the fuel. You don't care how much it costs. You just want to roll. But as a lease operator, I'm paying for the fuel. I want to be efficient, but I also want to look at the cost. So I feel like a lot of people, they drive till they get to like a quarter tank, and then wherever they are, they just stop and fill up. And that could be a substantial extra cost. Even depending on, it could even be like an 8-cent per gallon price difference for truck stops across the street from each other. But it could be something more dramatic, like 20 cents a gallon, if you'd have just gone another 14 miles up the road. And so it's important to know what the fuel prices are all along your route so you can plan that. The other thing is you want to make sure that you read the messages every day. And I'm not perfect at this, but I try to be conscientious about it. Read the messages every day so you know what fuel prices are going to do at midnight. You don't want to get caught in a situation where the price is going up 17 cents a gallon in every state that you're going to be in at midnight, and you're like, oh, I'll just get fuel in the morning when I wake up. No, you got to know. That's a huge thing. And over time, that could be, at least certainly thousands of dollars a year that you're spending that you don't need to, all because you don't dig out just a little bit of information that's on your phone in the app. So, read what the fuel prices are going to do the following days and know where you're going, what route you're taking, and find the cheapest fuel. Now, I did tell this guy I was talking to, I have one other consideration when deciding where to purchase fuel, and that is I am Love's loyal. So it is exceedingly rare that I go to a TA or a Petro. Why? Because I'm not a dinosaur, okay? TAs and Petros are, I can't even believe that in the 1960s they were considered good truck stops. I guess they were the only truck stops. But I'm just not, they put no money into infrastructure. I've been at places, I stopped at a TA in Indiana one night, and they didn't even have DEF at the pump. Like, you had to know which pumps to pull into to get DEF. That's how like Stone Age they are. So I don't even bother with them. It is, like I said, exceedingly rare. The only TA that I can think of that I ever have hit on a regular basis, and that would even be, I could count the number of times on one hand, is there's a TA on I-80 in Pennsylvania. It's around exit, like, I want to say maybe around exit 61. Excuse me. And it's really cheap. It's like the cheapest fuel across 80. That's the only time I ever go to that one. And it's basically the only TA I ever go to. So anyway, I do consider how many Love's points I will get as part of my calculus for price. Because let's say that the Love's is 2 cents more expensive than the Pilot across the street. I'll still go to Love's because I can get free sodas. I can always get free showers, and I'm getting at least 3 points per gallon that I pump. So that's the reason that I also consider, I look at what extra benefits I get from fueling at a place, in addition to the calculating, knowing what the fuel costs. But here's one more thing, and I'm pretty sure this is escaping a lot of people, and it's just experience, especially on Freightliners. Not so much on Peterbilts, but definitely on Freightliners. So just to compare, Freightliner fuel tank openings are on the side of the truck. You got that little opening in the fairing. You reach in there, you pull the top off the fuel tank. But the fuel tank is curved, and so the opening is not on the top where you'd think it would be the best place. It's on the side. It's kind of at, if it was a clock and I'm looking forward, it's probably about 10 o'clock. So between maybe 10 and 11. So what does that mean to you? Well, if you understand how liquid and gravity kind of work together, you know that you cannot fill that tank completely to the top. Why? Because the fuel is going to run out of the opening. But here's what I've learned from fueling Freightliners, and I'll talk about Peterbilts in a second. If you just stick the hose in there, you just stick the nozzle in there, and you put the latch on and you just let it fly, it's going to pop because the nozzles work on back pressure. So as soon as the nozzle senses sufficient back pressure, it closes the valve and the fuel shuts off. And the reason I know that this is a thing is because I had a trainee one time and I said, hey, fill the tanks up. And so they went out, and I don't know what I was doing, but I thought fill the tanks up was pretty self-explanatory. But they just filled the tanks up. But as soon as it popped, as soon as that back pressure built up and popped, they took the nozzle out, hung it up, did the same thing on both tanks. So then we get in the truck, but I think they were still driving. So I didn't pay close attention to how much fuel we had on board and what the fuel gauge said. But we got down the road and we were going to switch, and I was like, all right. And I started doing my prep, doing my pre-trip. I got, behind the steering wheel, and I was like, wait a minute. We just fueled like 80 miles ago and I got like 2/3 of a tank. Well, what I realized, and by the way, the fuel gauge on these trucks is only in the left tank. That's important to know. It's also important to know, by the way, that the APUs take their fuel suction only from the right-hand tank, passenger side tank. So like you might have it might say you have a quarter tank because that's the fuel gauge just reading the left tank, but your right tank might be almost empty and you're like, I don't know why my APU is not working. That's because it doesn't have enough fuel. It's not getting a suction. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you're fueling too, because sometimes I just fuel the left tank because I'm doing one of those brief stops for fuel type of thing, 50 gallons. But you got to keep in mind at some point you want to put fuel in the right tank. But what I realized when my trainee had fueled is I said, did you fill this thing up? And they were like, yeah, I filled it up. It popped and I hung the nozzles up. And so what I did is, because we were at another truck stop, I said, watch what happens. And I fueled again. And when it popped, I said, okay, it popped at whatever it was, whatever the reading was, 48 gallons, because we weren't empty. I said, watch how much more fuel I can put in. And then I put like another 20 gallons in the truck. And here's why that matters. If you're going to the place you think is the cheapest and you're, quote, filling up and all you do is fill it till it pops, you're leaving a lot of space in your tank empty, because you're not going to get 200 gallons on these trucks because the way the the way the tanks are engineered and where the openings are. You're not going to get 200 gallons, but you might get 160. But if the thing pops at 130, and I'm taking into account both tanks, there's 30 gallons of fuel that you're not buying, but you had already picked the cheapest place to buy it. That's like saying, I'm going to go to Walmart. I want to buy 30 cases of Diet Coke, because that's about what I drink every week. And Walmart has the best price, but then only buying 20 there and going to Piggly Wiggly and paying more for the other 10 cases. That's what you're doing when you have the cheapest place you can find and you want to fill up and you don't fill up. You're just leaving money on the table. And I think a lot of people miss out on that point. Now with the Peterbilts, the fuel opening is on top, well, I shouldn't say it's directly on top. It's kind of closer to the top and it's on the back. What I do is I pump until it pops, then I back the nozzle out and I watch it. And that's a luxury I have on the Peterbilt. It's a lot harder to do on a Freightliner. But I watch it and I fill it up until I can barely get the lid back on, because there's about this much space on the Peterbilt lid that goes into the tank, right? And then you turn and you latch it. The Freightliners, you just put it on and twist. But you can't leave all that empty space in there if you're buying the cheapest fuel, because over time that's costing you thousands of dollars. Okay, now you can ignore everything I said and just steal fuel from other trucks, but you might get a mouthful of diesel fuel while you're trying to siphon somebody's tank, and you know that sucks, because the taste it takes a lot longer to get diesel fuel taste out of your mouth than it does gasoline. Just speaking from experience. No, actually I'm not. So anyway, this has gone long enough, but I really feel like there's a lot of people that could just make more money by making a few little changes to how they operate that won't be a huge burden. So if you haven't thought of any of the things that I mentioned, or if you can think of other things that I haven't mentioned, you know, put it in the comments. But I hope this was helpful to at least one person. And I was going to talk about some other stuff. I'll do a different video for that. It's also about, you know, money. So anyway, I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.